Good morning. I am Donna Schlachman. I use she, her pronouns. And our opening words this morning come from Nikki Giovanni, who died last year at the age of 21. She was a world-renowned Black writer and poet, a university professor. Did I say 21?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that would be tragic. Yeah. The volume of work she did in 21 years, she was 81. Thank you, Coco. That's nerves. So this world-renowned writer and poet, university and professor, she was also the voice of resilience, love, and defiance. All most of us want is somebody to love and somebody we can love. We want a job we can go to. Sure, we're underpaid, but at least we know it's there. We want to feel that there is some dignity in our lives. I can't believe we are asking too much. We do want to feel there is something in us that is good, that is wonderful, and if we bring it out, nobody will trample on it. We want to feel we can commit to something a little beyond what we have seen. I can't believe we are asking too much. I can't believe that human beings have to continue to go back to square one all of the time. We know how to do hate. We know how to do ignorance. We know how to do war. We know how to do indifference. We know how to do all the mean, ugly, dirty things of this world. We don't have to practice that. We have to practice loving, caring, and tolerance. And it is time that we started. Okay, good morning again. Join me. I welcome you now into my personal story of race, transformation, and Unitarian Universalism. It didn't turn off? My hope is that in sharing my story, you will find yourselves and your story. Not in the specifics of something I've said, but in some touch points, some small things that have big impacts. My story with racism began at birth, as did yours likely, especially if you were born in the United States, which really is literally the birthplace of racism. But the history of racism is not why I'm here today. Today, I want to share how my UU faith shaped my anti-racism work, and maybe it has or will yours. You may have participated since 2020 in one of the many anti-racism book groups, streamed movie discussions, meetings with guests from the Black community, and Black history documentaries and discussions. You may have attended Black History Month events, African Roots Library talks, films, panels, and a Juneteenth celebration, or attended the Summer African American Cultural Festival. And well before I arrived here, you may have been part of the congregation that installed the large, beautiful banner, Black Lives Matter, on the outside of our old sanctuary. I am grateful for the statement made Sundays. We affirm Black Lives Matter. I am grateful that as a group of people, as different as we are in so many ways of being different, we declare Black Lives Matter. As philosopher, professor, and activist Angela Davis says, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We need to be anti-racist. I appreciate the aspirations of this congregation and of our faith. I was not, as a child, on course to be a UU. I was born in Queens to a mother from a very rural, very Christian part of the South, and a father from a Russian, Polish, Jewish immigrant family that settled in Baltimore. When I was 3, we moved to Nassau County for better schools, not for a religious home. Race and religion were not topics of conversation in our family. We were not a family that talked. Most that my parents had to say about race was to occasionally remark that some person of color was a credit to their race. I learned years later that this declaration that somebody is a credit to their race is embedded in white culture. Michelle Obama put it best when relaying a story of her mother when Marion Robinson was asked by a reporter how proud she must be of her daughter's educational and professional achievement. Mrs. Robinson replied, "Oh, Southside Chicago is full of Michelles." I never knew I carried the idea of race and exceptionalism until later in my life when I took time to look at my own assumptions and beliefs. With no big conversations about race at the dinner table at my house in the 50s and 60s, it was the subject at the kitchen table of a very close childhood friend of mine. It was at her house that I got to have lunch with Julian Bond, one of the first Black people seated in the Georgia House of Representatives. And it was in her house that I first learned the words Unitarian Universalism. And in 10th grade, I began to attend racially integrated parties with UUs from Queens, the Bronx, Manhattan, and Westchester. It was with these UUs that friendships with non-white kids were formed. And it was with UUs that I spent weekends at gatherings and teach-ins talking about issues of freedom, equality, peace, and justice. It was because of the UU's LRY, which was called then Liberal Religious Youth, that I began to find my voice, to question my parents, of course, and to protest injustices. This was my first transformation. This was the power of our faith. It prepared me to see myself as a potential agent of change. But none of these experiences went deep enough to name my whiteness, to see my privilege beyond economics and education. And I did not see myself as being part of the problem, part of the story of racism. Now, none of us can know whether if XYZ had not happened, we would or would not be who we are today. But my UU experiences remained inside, and I challenge anyone here to tell me that I would be no different without them. Even though during the first 13 years of our marriage, Rob and I did not engage in any religious organization at all. It was not until we were living in New Hampshire and our daughter was about 5 that UU reappeared in my life. I had a coworker, a mother figure really, with whom I had far-reaching conversations over lunch. And regularly, matter-of-factly, she would say, "You know you are a UU, don't you? You should come with me some Sunday." And one Sunday, at the urging of our daughter, who is now 6, that we go to church on Sundays, we did. We went with Mary, and we spent 35 years as part of that congregation. Thus began the second part of transformation for me, being invited into a community that spoke to our values, that created opportunities to grow, that nurtured our daughter in her place in the larger world, that taught her the value of questioning and seeking answers, that instilled in her celebrating diversity and honoring the planet. It was with our UU friends that we protested the nuclear power plant being built, attended local and national demonstrations for women's rights, for economic and racial equality, and more. It was in this part of my life, within this community of UUs, that my youthful social activism was reawakened. It was here that I learned the meaning of religion, the binding together. But my slow journeys towards full-blown anti-racism work began with the birth of our second child, and it was a long journey that ended in the transformation I am still experiencing now. In 1985, with an almost 9-year-old, and with 4 years working with adoption agencies, we were offered a yet not born biracial baby. At this point in our lives, we were not looking to adopt a baby. We were not looking to adopt a non-white child. First of all, we felt too old to go back to babyhood. And secondly, we understood the strong opinions on transracial adoption that was held by the National Association of Black Social Workers. We had, in fact, been turned away earlier from inquiries into non-white kids listed in the adoption resources exchanges because of our race. What would you do? Well, Rob and I came to a consensus, and then we sought the opinions of friends, of course. The first opinion was from best friends of 18 years, an interracial Puerto Rican Chinese family with 4 kids. They said, no, you are too old. The second opinion was from a close friend whose son actually, at age 7, married our daughter, age 3. And she's African American, and she said to us, yes, if anybody can do this, you can. We didn't negate the opinion of the National Association of Black Social Workers. Rather, we rationalized our situation. We said here was a baby that without adoption was going to grow up with a white birth mother, so why not me? We truly believed that color would not be an issue. We believed because we lived in the North, our whiteness would protect our son from racism. Clearly, in spite of all I have said about becoming a UU, engaging in activism, taking to heart the 7 principles, we were clueless about race. We had absolutely no idea how much race does matter. Of course, race matters. And it first showed up when Alex was almost 3 and the KKK came to our town because they decided it would be good to elect somebody to our town council. Our UU community did not let us down. We partnered with the local high school and other churches in organizing a march down Main Street, culminating in speeches at the town hall. And on election day, we stood with our minister at the polls, holding signs so every voter would know who was on the ballot, and to ensure that would never happen again. So we had our election day victory. We felt our white protective shield was stronger than those white hooded robes as I stood in front of them holding my son. Now, this KK event might have served as a wake-up call straight from the Southern Poverty Law Center's tracking magazine that they always put out, saying what's happening and how many white supremacist people are moving to the northeast and being very active. We knew this, but we naively believed we had stopped racism, and I believed Alex would be fine. Maybe it was because then we had 3 kids, bad excuse, but it didn't occur to us to do more. It didn't occur to us to join a local NAACP chapter. That was not until many years later. By living in a mythological bubble where his race did not matter, we failed Alex. We did not talk about color. We did not talk about others, how others might see him differently. We did not provide him with the tools to respond to hurtful situations. We did not teach him that prejudice does not equal truth. It was not until he was in 2nd grade that he began to learn on the playground how others might perceive his color. It was the first time that he was called chocolate face. I think our whole UU community lived with this race doesn't matter, whiteness equals safety myth with us. We all did such a good job not making anything of our son's color that the kids in his RE class who had been with him since birth did not see his brown skin as being a difference that might impact him out in the world. I know this because when he was 12, the RE class did an exercise where the kids were supposed to think about prejudice and stereotypes, and then they were asked to raise their hands if any of them had experienced being treated differently because of some physical feature. Alex told us he was the only one that raised his hand. They all looked at him like, why is your hand up? And then one kid said, Alex, why is your hand up? So he had to explain to his class his hand was up because he was black. They did not understand. They did not see this as a problem. And it was not a problem to them. But he knew it was a problem because he was the one living in his skin. Alex knew race mattered. It mattered in ways that white people don't usually see. As a teenager, when he went into a store with his younger, taller, white brother, and they split up to go to different sections, Alex was always the one followed. This is something that we white people miss. We miss the many ways those who are outside our whiteness may experience every day differently. We just don't see it happening. For a long time, Rob and I missed it too. But by the time Alex was in junior high, it began to hit us in the face. We witnessed Alex being treated differently by referees on the soccer field. He got blamed for behaviors that other kids around him were also engaged in. And as a young driver and as an adult, he was frequently stopped by law enforcement for bogus reasons. So fast forward to May 25th, 2020, the murder of George Floyd. Death at the hands of police was nothing new, even though lynchings had stopped in 1980, I guess was the last one. Murders by law enforcement have never stopped. And after the 2012 murder of teenager Trayvon Martin, Black Lives Matter's movement began to heighten white awareness of this and other practices. But it was the public posting of all 9 minutes and 29 seconds of the suffocation of Mr. Floyd that shocked the world. And that was when some people of color broke their protective silence, including our son, Alex, who until age 35 had pretty much kept his experiences with racial discrimination to himself. Our son took to Facebook to use his own words to share that race matters. And I will share them in a minute. And in 225, the UU Catskills Racial Justice Working Group was transformative work for me. With it, I circled back to my privilege of being a white, well-educated, economically comfortable, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, neurotypical person, one free to move about the world in safety without fear. I circled back to my belief mentioned earlier that I could protect my child from what Cornel West describes as a white culture that degrades and devalues Black worth, Black intelligence, Black ability, and Black character. The work we did challenged us to move out of our protective bubbles, and it was during this time that I began to develop new friendships among Black people in the community, and not surprisingly, to recognize racism in more settings, including here. As I moved my own anti-racism work outside of our UU walls, I let myself believe that the reformation of our UU values into words and statements centered on love, and where is our sign? It's back there. That was enough. But I also felt our congregation was moving into a state of disengagement, of been there, done that. And just as I was despairing and floundering as to how to revive UU Catskills' engagement with racial justice, and as the Social Action Committee as a whole was beginning to look at the interdependentness, interrelatedness of intersectionality, that's the word I'm looking for, of all the work that they do, just as this was happening, both Reverend Margret and Karen Miller, who's here somewhere, sent me information about the UUA 2025 General Assembly's, and this is a mouthful, Congregational Study Action Issue, which is called Abolition, Transformation, and Faith Formation. Abolition, just a little side thing, is about presence, not absence. It's about working for life-affirming changes in cultural changes in our institutions. Sorry, abolition. So this congregational study action issue was proposed by the Church of the Larger Fellowship, which ministers to over 2,000 UUs who are incarcerated. The services are open to all online. Karen's been going to them for years. Interestingly, and not surprisingly, not at the same time because it predates us, our nation's civil rights leaders have long been calling for a revolution of values. They know incarceration, among other practices, is slavery continued. They talk of the critical need for a moral revival centered on love. Again, systemic and interconnected issues of poverty, racism, transphobia, ecological devastation are points of focus with this movement to shift the moral compass of our public policy. We hang our flags here for a reason. My hope is that you see yourself in this need for a moral revival as our congregation participates in abolition, transformation, and faith formation starting this January. I invite you into this learning with me to create concrete change. For our congregation to progress, we must not just side with love, as our banner outside declares. We must transform ourselves and our congregation with love from the inside. We must be vigilant participants in building beloved abolitionist communities that recognize the intersectionality of race, poverty, gender and identity, economics, and climate as we work for systemic moral shifts. We cannot do this work alone, and we already know a lot of who the partners are in the community. So I hope you will be with me in January. Thank you. I'm going to end this sermon with the Facebook page I mentioned earlier. That's Alex, our son, posted in spring of 2020. In watching the protests, riots, and demonstrations for the last couple of weeks, I have painfully decided to recount bouts of racial inequality I've experienced. My experiences with racism are surprising to people I share them with, since I grew up as a Black person in New Hampshire, where racial diversity was minimal. I never knew that my Black band teacher in 6th grade, Mr. Bethel, would be right to warn me how difficult my life would be as a Black man in the world. What my story proves is that racism is possible anywhere. I want to share a timeline of the most painful experiences to inform people of all races that an adopted half-Black person raised in New Hampshire, what an adopted half-Black person in New Hampshire can endure. Age 7, I was called chocolate face by a fellow classmate. My friend, Sean Brown, who's also Black, defended me, and we were sent home from school. That was the day I found out I was a different color than my family. In elementary school, I had a racist bus driver, and my parents had to remove me from the bus and drive me to school for the rest of the year. At 9, a parent from the opposing soccer team yelled, and this is a quote, "Get that nigger off the field." Age 12, a kid on the bus said, "Your face is dirty. I think you should go home and wash it." At 15, I started noticing I was being followed in stores for my entire shopping experience. Age 16, I was pulled over at a stop sign for speeding when I was going 1 mile over the speed limit. I'd only had a license for 2 days, and I was fearful of speeding, so I had set my cruise control. The officer issued me a citation for 15 miles over, and I lost my license for 2 months. At 18, I was teaching my girlfriend to drive a standard at my old middle school. A police officer pulled her over. I was ordered out of the car, searched, and questioned by 2 police officers. There were no consequences for my girlfriend who was driving. At 19, I was pulled by the arm from my property onto the public sidewalk by a police officer so I could be charged with public intoxication. At 19, I was sleeping in my car waiting for an intoxicated friend so I could provide the safe ride home. Despite being sober, I was confronted by the police and taken into custody. Once in custody, I passed all the sobriety tests with one exception. Instead of standing on 1 foot for 30 seconds, I stood for 60 seconds, and I was charged with not following directions and got a DUI and lost my license for 18 months. At 19, I realized I was afraid of the police. At 20, I was confronted by officers walking on a known drug-dealing path. I was not in possession of drugs. I was arrested. In the summertime, and I have to tell you, this is a summer scene on Hampton Beach in New Hampshire where at closing time, it is just throngs of people on the street. At 21, I was arrested and beaten in front of many bystanders' friends for trying to hop on a police officer's motorcycle. I was only walking down the street with hundreds of people. At 24, a New Hampshire state trooper from a previous arrest pointed me out in a bar to his neighbor, who then, after following me to the restroom, broke my jaw and gave me a concussion and left the bar with the officer. The assailant's punishment was to pay my medical bills after insurance, rather than the felony charge deserved because he didn't have a record. There were no consequences for the state trooper despite efforts of my attorney. My record, a compilation of police discrimination, made it so that I was not reputable. Final one. At 30, I was traveling as a passenger with a white female friend. She was pulled over for speeding, yet I was questioned about my involvement with her because the officer believed she was in danger. She did not receive a ticket or a warning. Sure, I did stupid things when I was younger, like the majority of people did, but these experiences I have no control over will haunt me the rest of my life. Thank you to friends and family who have been with me through this. Sean Brown, you and your family will never know how much you helped me grow up as a Black person in a white town. Mom and Dad, please never take any of this personally. People still have not figured it out. To people who stood up for the police, for me, thank you. I told you to stop, but you persisted, and some of you were arrested. Thank you. I cannot believe I will have to pass these warnings on to my son. We are all the same inside. The color of our skin should never matter. So many people have been through much worse than I can imagine. I am only aiming to let people know that this can happen in a small New Hampshire town to a half-white, half-Black person. Open your eyes. Let's make change. Each of us is already part of the story of race. We can choose to be part of the story of anti-racism. In January, join me in our FACE transformation efforts to build beloved abolitionist communities centered on love. May it be so.